Welcome to our Education Push for Excellence Education Town Hall. I know that many of you have been waiting to hear what are we going to do about reopening schools? How will our students go back to colleges and universities and be safe? What are some of the issues and concerns that parents should be aware of? What are educators wrestling with? What's going to happen with the staff? What's going to happen with athletics? We're going to talk about all of that tonight. What are the legal challenges that you face? So we have a number of people. We have the experts of all experts. Our moderator is a former president of an HBCU, a historic Black college. She's an economist, and so she's able to cover the gamut with all of the areas that we're going to discuss tonight. Push Excel wants you to know that we are your advocate. We are the organization that addresses educational issues and concerns. And so I want you to greet warmly Dr. Julianne Malveaux, former president of Bennett College, the current president of Push for Excellence, the education arm for all of America and all over the world. Thank you, Dr. Malveaux, for joining us.
Thank you, Reverend Wilson, and all of you. Thank you, assembled panelists, but also thank you to those who are watching. Nobody knows what we can do with Corona. We have had a pathetic handling of the virus, and it's spiking. It's not the second time, as someone said, we're still in phase 1, but some folks are trying to be in phase 2. The challenge here, of course, for college and university students, faculty, presidents, is how we manage this. How do we ensure that our students are able to be safe, that they have good well-being, that they have the opportunity to have, college is not just about sitting in a classroom and looking at a computer screen. There are also other benefits, socialization. I was trying to think of how people could pledge virtually, Glenda, virtual learning. But in any case, some of the things that people think of as some of the accoutrements of higher education, we're trying to figure out how to deal with those. Furthermore, many colleges and universities depend on the revenue from dorms and from food service. What's going to happen there? There's so many ways that we can basically unpack that. And that's why I have this expert panel to help. You know, reopening, what do we need to reopen? I was with some people yesterday and they talked about how classes had to be 10 people or less. Well, if classes have to be 10 people or less, how much extra space are we going to need? You know, and do we have the extra space? So this is more questions than the answers, but these presidents with us and others can help us basically deal with it. So I want to introduce the panel as we begin to talk about some of these issues. But before I do, actually, I need to emphasize the importance of us being vigilant with legislation. There is a piece of legislation now, was the reauthorization, helping people with the $600. And of course, the Republicans, I'll just call it what it is, the Republicans think that people won't go back to work if they get $600 a week. That's crazy. But the other piece of this legislation is a piece of the legislation that provides some funds for higher education. The first bite of the apple did provide some funds for higher education, but they were divided by enrollment. And so those colleges that had large enrollments got more money. But we know that many of our HBCUs are smaller and basically have more students who need more remediation. So to say, basically, we're going to divide this equally is to make it unequal. But we know that this administration is not concerned particularly with equity. And so we have to be very vigilant about this, because I'll hear from the presidents, but I know that many of our HBCUs are really, really struggling. We're struggling before, but this is like icing on the cake. We know that we're going to lose 60% of our Black-owned businesses. We know that we're going to lose a lot because of Corona. Not because of Corona, but because of the mishandling of Corona. That's what the challenge is. So let me go directly to this panel, this distinguished panel. I'm going to start with Dr. Glenda Glover, who is the president of Tennessee State University. I'm going to move on. Jeanette Wilson, who is our executive director at Push Excel, will be joining us in conversation. I have, let's see here. Is Lily McNair with us? She's not. Okay.
We have Attorney C.K. Hoffler with us, and she needs to jump in and out to go to another Zoom call, as does Dr. Glover.
Okay, well, let me get, how long does CK have?
She has about another 10 minutes.
Okay, let me continue to introduce her, then I'll get her in.
Okay.
Michael Douglas, no, not Michael Douglas. David Sanders, president of Malcolm X College. You there? Okay, cool. Curtis Wright, vice president of student services. At which university? Curtis Wright, are you there?
Vice President Xavier.
Xavier, okay.
But I don't know if he's on the call.
Oh, okay. And then we have Logan Hampton, president of Lane College. Are you there?
Thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you for being with us. Did I leave any of my education people out?
You've left off two. You have the president the vice president of University of Illinois, vice chancellor of UIC, which is Rex Tolliver. You have Dr. Verrett, who is the president of Xavier College. And then you have the president of Tuskegee University also on the call.
She isn't here. I've called on her twice. I've asked her.
She's here. She's been having some issues with the video, but she's on. Okay, cool. And then you have Dr. Sonia Whitaker.
Oh yes, Sonia. How could I forget you with all the good work you've done? Sonia is the deputy superintendent for the Dalton West District in Illinois. Is it in Chicago, Sonia, or in Illinois?
It's 40 minutes outside of the city of Chicago.
Okay, so it's in Illinois, and she's just an exceptional asset to Push Excel. She's worked with us on many of these town halls and so many other things. Now, let me ask first, how are you responding to these issues? These issues are overwhelming. I'm happy that I'm not a college president right now because there's so many things to touch on. But Linda, let me start with you because you're a state-funded university. Has the state stepped in and provided you with additional resources to deal with Corona?
Thank you. Thank you and good evening. It's always good to be on a show with you. You bring so much spunk to it. So thank you very much. And to the other presidents and the other officials here today, good evening. Yes, the state of Tennessee has an unusual setup in that it has an HBCU office that assists all the colleges, the Black colleges in Tennessee. TSU is the only public college, but then there are the other private schools. I'm not sure how much funding is distributed, but it's there for assistance. And I got my brother here from Lane College, Dr. Hampton will speak to that also. But they have assisted to the extent that the CARES Act allowed them to assist. CARES Act had funding for HBCUs, and TSU got a share. The share was by formula. I don't know the details of the formula, but it was quite helpful, but it was by no means enough to meet all the needs of the students. First, there were students who left, had to go home early March, mid-March, when the corona actually became, the virus actually became the virus. The students went home and we had to find ways to get them home. That was the first challenge. With them some had no homes to which to return. So we had to work through all of those issues. So the first part of the CARES Act was for that. And the second part was when it was a little bit more restrictive at first. We were on the phone, unfortunately, speaking with Congresswoman Marsha Fudge, Alma Adams, Kamala Harris. I mean, they were really some troopers to help get the funding be less restrictive so they could, as long as you met the guidelines. There were some of the restrictions were removed because first they were talking about all STEM schools. I mean, it was a little too cumbersome to help all HBCUs. And so it was helpful to just answer your question, but it is by no means, it doesn't take us where we need to go because we're still struggling with trying to get devices, technology devices, trying to get the laptops, trying, get it's so many things we have to get to meet just the healthcare, the health expert standards for the fall. So I know we go into a little bit more tonight, but that's just a specific answer to the funding part of it.
Great, thank you so much. I want to go to Rex Tolliver, who's the Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Want to talk a bit about what does student affairs look like in this environment?
Thank you, Dr. Malveaux. Of course, trying to ensure that students are engaged during this pandemic is one of the things that is critical, I believe, to student success. So we had a run of this in the spring. Unlike many of our institutions across the country, we did not close. We did not force students off campus, for lack of a better word. We remained open and in our residence hall. And we created a very strong virtual engagement program for our students. And it was well received by our students. And I think that's what's going to be critical moving forward. Our academic resources, our tutors, our support centers, as well as things that we're doing with programming are all going to be virtual. We will have some small components as we reopen in the fall, but we have invested to ensure that we have a virtual component to make sure students are engaged. Because if our students aren't engaged in this virtual sense, it's going to be hard for them to succeed. It's going to be hard for them to be able to persist. So I think we just have to rethink how we're doing it, because most of the things that we do from a student service standpoint can be done online. It is a redeployment of resources, and I think officials have to be okay with that some things that employees were doing that were more in person, we've been working on training them to do things virtually to assist with that demand.
Thank you. I want to go to David Saunders, who's the president of Malcolm X College. Want to ask you about talking about virtual learning, and just about everybody. Most folks are either doing virtual or a hybrid with a little bit of in-person learning, but mostly virtual learning. But many faculty, frankly, have not been trained to do virtual teaching. What do you do about that? How do you, I mean, having been a president, I know faculty, I always tell people, deal with faculty is like herding cats. Many of them don't want to do new stuff. So how do you get them, incentive them to do new stuff?
Well, thank you, Dr. Malveaux. It's an excellent question. So first I want to pay homage to my faculty because we were able to revert to remote learning within a week of the pandemic, and allow about 85% of our students to move from face-to-face to remote. So that was an excellent opportunity, and the hard work that they did, I'm really excited about. But there are challenges. Certainly our students, this is not the preferred mode of learning. And so we had to make adjustments. It also is not the preferred mode of teaching for our faculty. And we had to adjust them. We had to get our IT folks to really come in and support some of our faculty who were not as prepared to work with technology. They are subject matter experts, certainly, but that's just not their area. And as I would sure some of my colleagues have, many of our faculty are a little more seasoned. And so they need more assistance when it comes to technology. But it's not just on the faculty side, it's on the student side as well. We're an open access institution, so we take students no matter what your condition is. And many of our students are not prepared for that. So we had to really work with them to help them to come through that. And in the end, what we decided was that we would provide them with an opportunity to take the course over free of charge if they weren't successful, because this is not what they paid for. And we wanted to be fair and equitable to our students and ensure that they had an opportunity to address this situation, not just within the term, but if they weren't successful after the term.
Great policy, especially many parents are concerned about what are they paying for, because they paid for the on-campus experience. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit to get to attorney C.K. Hoffler. She is the president of the National Bar Association. She's the chair of Rainbow, and she is a seasoned attorney, and I want her to address some of the legal issues that are associated with reopening.
Unmute. Unmute.
There's a little microphone at the bottom of
All
your.
right. Can you
Okay.
hear me? I had such a wonderful introduction. I was going to town and nobody could hear me. Well, to Dr. Malveaux, thank you so much for your kind introduction. To Dr. Glenda Glover, it's been a while since we worked together, I think about a decade ago. To Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, and to the others on the phone. It's really an honor to be here to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. I have two sons. They are now they're 15 and 17, so 10th and 12th grade, one going to college, I hope soon. And these challenges are really near and dear to my heart. I look at the legal questions every day because I help companies, law firms transition their teams back to the workplace. I also have been asked to help different schools to transition their students back into some quasi remote learning. And I personally made a decision for my family that my children would continue with remote learning. There's no way conceivable that I believe, but again, these are high school students. But when we talk about high school students, they're just a step removed from college students. And I don't feel that there was any way conceivable that my high school sons would be able to, for an 8-hour stretch, wear a mask and maintain the level of discipline with social distancing that is absolutely required in a school setting. And I know that at their school, a good number of teachers quit instantly when they heard that they were going to have to, some of them, teach in the classroom. They just quit. They said it's not worth the risk. So here in hot Atlanta, which is where I am, in Georgia, where the numbers are going steadily up because we do have that governor who prematurely opened up the state. And that is why now our numbers are just off the chain in terms of those affected and who have died of COVID. In terms of legal ramifications, the schools and universities certainly have to be careful, and I'm sure they have their general counsels advising them, because they do open themselves up to liability. What kind of liability? Well, we know everybody is aware that COVID exists. There's some universities that are asking the students, and maybe these are the athletes, to sign waivers for the students to come back on campus. Well, for those, some families have consulted me as to whether their children should sign waivers, and I've advised them not to do that, because when they have to, in order to maintain their scholarship, they have to participate in a sport, they have to come back on campus, and the schools are mandating that they sign waivers. There's some inequity there. And I believe that there is liability on behalf of the school, and certainly there's some exposure on behalf of the child or on behalf of the young adult. So I think there are a lot of legal issues such as waiver, such as whether if a school does bring students on campus or does not ask them to leave campus, they bring them on campus prematurely and the students do contract COVID and they can provide evidence that they didn't have COVID prior to coming back to school, then there's an open question as to whether or not that university is going to have some type of liability. Why? Because the university is now going to be held to a standard, and you know, the CDC, well, you know, if we watch what our administration is doing and saying, we don't know whether we're coming or going. So, but the CDC and other reliable sources, the National Medical Association, for instance, do give us guidelines as to how we should conduct ourselves if children or if young adults are going back on campuses. So when we see the NFL, for instance, suspending a season or suspending their games, or other sports, it's hard to justify college campuses mandating that the kids practice when the league itself is saying that they are suspending their games and the like. So I think there are some liability issues, some exposure issues, but no matter what, it's critically important. If you are a college president, like many of you are, we know our HBCUs are hurting anyway. We have opened up our doors to many of the students that had no place to go, didn't have the luxury of going back home, particularly if they're foreign students. We know that you must take extra precautions to have protective gear. It is not going to be an acceptable justification not to have masks available, not to have a way of gauging people's temperatures, not to have to ensure that the dorms are cleaned and sanitized. So it can't be business as usual. Business as usual will likely land you into some exposure and liability down the line, even if there are waivers. So I just caution all of our esteemed presidents who are on the line that you may want to seek. I'm sure your general counsels or your outside counsel are giving you advice. If not, you must get advice. At the National Bar Association, there are 3 pandemics that we're tackling: COVID-19, election suppression, and police brutality. So I would put these concerns, the education, higher education concerns, in the category of our COVID-19 initiative, where we are, and I have issued a mandate, I was sworn in last week, to all 66,000 African-American lawyers that are out there in this country and jurists to pick up the mantle and to help with these 3 pandemics, because our community, we cannot rely on what the federal government is saying. We may not be able to rely on, as in Georgia, what the state government is doing. So the mayors, some of them, we may be able to rely on them, but we must take our community into our own hands and take it upon ourselves to educate our community. And that's where the universities can play an important role. Education. There's funding for education, hosting seminars, hosting these types of platforms, and getting funding for purposes of having professionals and experts to come and educate not just the students, because that's critical, but also the communities at large. Many of our universities are in our community. So the community can also benefit from the education, because if they watch TV, and if they watch our president, and if they watch that the federal government, they will be as confused as they were in the beginning of March, because they're conflicting signals and people are dying. So my advice in terms of legal ramifications, take them seriously, and we can't be asleep at the wheel. And if you need fortification, if you need, when I say fortification, if you need support, legal support, please reach out to the National Bar Association. We have 3 task forces that are addressing this. We're in the police brutality, for instance, we're helping people get out of jail, these protesters who are protesting in a nonviolent way. So we're helping our communities every single day throughout the country. So please feel free to reach out. But if not, each of you have your own general counsels and lawyers, but I would ask you to listen to their advice.
Thank you so much, CK. And I know that you have another commitment. So thank you for taking the time to join us, and we appreciate your leadership at Rainbow Push. So we appreciate you.
Well, thank you.
Dr. Melvo, may I jump in and just say one thing to Attorney Huffman? That is, you have a son that's going to college. I'd like to personally offer him a scholarship to come to Tennessee State University.
All right. All right. Now you're talking my language. Thank you very much. So we'll definitely talk. And Dr. Glover, you know, and I say this for all of you, I've met many of you before. It is so great to see you, but Lord have mercy, Jesus, thank you. Did I say Lord have mercy, Jesus, thank you? There are people of the cloth here.
That's a Lord have mercy moment.
But that is.
And then that's good looking out.
Bruce.
So thank you so much. And I do have to run. I have 2 more panels that I have to do, but Rainbow Push is near and dear to my heart. You all know I've represented and been a part of this organization, whether representing Reverend Jackson, the organizations, the family, anything that's asked me for 32 of my 33 years as a lawyer. So clearly the first place I stopped was here. So thank you. And just let me know what I can do, what the National Bar can do, because we're ready. This is not a time to play.
We appreciate you and the National Bar Association. I'm sure there is going to be lots of things that we can look into, not to mention election suppression and your stupid governor. Did I just say stupid governor? Yeah, I did.
And there are other words that we could use.
But
that's certainly where we start.
Please don't use.
Yeah, no, because I don't want to ruin, you know.
Don't encourage me, because you those who know me know I can.
No, she's doing fine. Don't.
I'm doing fine. So I'm going to take leave now, because my attitude might go in a different direction when we talk about our governor. Because you know, when you see people dying around you,
yes,
when you see your mayor and her family that have COVID, it's some kind of something. Because we went from knowing
not even mandate masks.
Right.
Mandate masks.
It's right. And we're acting here. There are people who are just walking around without masks because our governor has put in place measures that are just completely unreasonable. But I see Robert Patillo, attorney Robert Patillo, who's brilliant, who's the executive director of Rainbow Push Coalition, regional executive director, and he can pick up the mantle on Georgia and tell you how crazy it is operating in this place. So love you all, and I will see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. And
Thank
Brother
you.
Patillo, I'm going to get to you in a minute. I want to go back to my presidents because I want to really have them give us the opportunity to hear what's going on their campuses, what kind of decisions they're having to make. I mean, much of this is economic. You know, economics is a study of who gets what, when, where, and why. And that's what you're doing. You're looking at your budgets. What are you going to have to cut out? What can you keep? This is a really challenging time. I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. I have the president of Xavier University. My mom is a Xavier kind of alum. She went there for a couple of years. I think they put her out.
That makes me an alum.
Okay. She makes me send y'all money from time to time.
You should. But
You're
remember,
also an immunologist. Tell us what's going on at Xavier and what kind of adjustments have you had to make?
look, if I might defer, I know there is economics at the root of the problem, but also the problem is also scientific, it's also social in a large way. In coming to what we had to do at Xavier and in many of our campuses, other HBCUs, it was really addressing how to make campus safer, safer than the environment in which our universities are in the country, which means campus have to be safe. Very early, I'm talking about very early, I mean late January, the decision that basically masks would be required, that we would actually began to mandate things that were not being mandated by our leaders was very important. So it was about good science. I'll bring one number which has always struck us, that Taiwan has a population of about 24 million people, which is about New York State, Connecticut, add Massachusetts to it. They had 450 cases of COVID-19, and they've had 7 deaths. So in other words, we've had 150,000 deaths in this country. I would say most of those are probably deaths from neglect. In the American society, what we have to face at Xavier, it may be because of our Black and also Catholic culture, that we understood that basically it was not about ourselves, but about the person next to us. The American society, maybe going back to several decades, has focused on the autonomy of the individual. So we had been speaking about almost my privilege, whether it's white privilege or other privileges as well. So now we were creating a new privilege, which was the privilege to infect someone next to me. I don't have to wear a mask. It is my right, my privilege to infect anyone I want to. We've reversed that at Xavier by saying very early that basically when you came back on campus, you would have to wear a mask. You'd have to socially distance. You'd have to actually create hygiene. Hygiene was not having someone else clean for me, because there are people who clean the campus and do that very well intensively. But it's about the in-between, so that each person coming into a classroom, they were cleaning materials on my table, I would have to clean my own table and clean that table when I finish. So therefore, I was not leaving anything behind for the next person, whether Julianne or somebody else came to use my table. So it was not about the individual. We have to reverse the normal American focus on my individual rights rather than the rights of the community. And I go back to Taiwan. Taiwan was bathed with COVID-19 early in the fact, and it kept coming. They only died, 7 people died, because when people wore their masks, they weren't wearing their masks for each other, for themselves. It wasn't about it was whether to protect someone else. And in many ways, the communitarian aspects of our communities, of telling people that we have a responsibility to each other, is what we will be relying upon. So there is technology that will come to help us. We'll have great testing. We may have great vaccines coming up. But essentially, the old school methods, I mean, old school meaning 1960s, wearing masks, washing your hands, keeping distance from each other, saves lives. It works. There's no magic there. That's why other countries are doing so well. So we know what to do to protect our campuses. The one thing that we have to do is to do without exception. One of the things that we're doing is our students themselves are forming a group called the Community Health Ambassadors, 30 or 40 students under Curtis Wright, our VP of Student Affairs, who will be there in their jackets reminding people of what they should be doing, whether they have a mask or not, that they can't be walking in counterflow traffic, that here's what you need to do. If a stranger coming on our campus, they'll have masks in their pocket to say, here's a mask for you, here's what we do. But nobody's going to come, even if it's someone much more important elected to a high office that we may know. If you were to come on my campus you would have to wear a mask. First, I can say that because I'm not a public institution. That's one luxury.
Well,
But
good for
we
you.
have-
and Good for infusing a culture of mask wearing, which our president has failed to do. We're not going to go there. We are joined by our founder, Reverend Jesse Jackson, who is on the line. And Rev, we're talking about COVID and higher education, but I know you've got some comments for us. So the floor is yours.
Talking about the excellence of Xavier is what we're really talking about. I like this expounding. Let me say to you, I'm delighted that Raymond Push is having this conference today, because one thing during slavery time, if a slave raped a woman, it's his property, be the man his property. Teaching slaves to read and write, he go to jail. Strong minds break strong chains. That's all we're really trying to say. Strong minds break strong chains. And we hold fast to that. I'm anxious for us to have a virtual conference today. Don't forget, this coming Thursday is August the 6th. It's really July the 4th. We got the right to vote. Dr. King was often saying staff meetings, so Emmett Till, he followed the case very closely. They thought that they'd indict somebody, the killing was so horrendous. The jury wouldn't indict anybody. And they asked one juror, why didn't you indict? He said, well, we couldn't imagine why going to jail for killing an Indian. He said, there had been one black on the jury, theoretically, the hung the jury. This idea of voting in juries and voting in power is a big deal. And so August the 6th is our D-Day, not 1776, but 1965. Coming out of that, blacks could vote for the first time, white women could vote in the South. 18-year-olds could vote, on campus, could vote bilingually, Native Americans could vote. When we do this thing this way, it happens. So we're fighting for our schools. Some of our schools are really underfunded. We must fight for the adequate funding of our schools. In fact, the Warren had a 2% wealth tax, going to give $50 billion to black schools. We must have a demand that's commensurate with our power. We have the power to make that demand. She's not the president, but we have the power to make that demand. 2% wealth tax means $50 billion for black colleges. I look forward to fighting that fight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend. And again, thank you as always for your leadership, for your excellence, and for being a long distance runner. Being there, I just wrote a piece about John Lewis, and I mentioned that you led your first sit-in when you were, I think, 18 or 19 years old. So when people keep talking about youth leadership, there were youth who had leadership. There's some who don't, but there were many who did. And so we have to give y'all a salute and a shout out. I want to go now to the president of Lane College, Logan Hampton, president of Lane College. And what have you had to do? What has your biggest challenge been? And clearly everybody has many challenges, but what has been your biggest challenge?
Well, our biggest challenge has been trying to conceive of how we will deliver on our mission in the midst of this pandemic that is a threat to the health and safety of our students and an existential threat to our institution. That has been our greatest challenge. I mean, we are a liberal arts institution. We're residential. We are affiliated with the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. And many of our students arrive on our campus needing everything that we offer. They need the rigorous instruction to help shape them and sharpen their scholar skills and their scholar habits, to push them to acquire scholar level knowledge. We have a residential learning community where students come and they live on campus. In this community, our students will be challenged in terms of dress code. They'll be challenged in terms of curfew. They'll be challenged in terms of chapel attendance. And so we ask the question, how do we deliver on that mission? And how do we do it in an environment where we have a new set of protocols and constructs? Of course, as all of the institutions have done across the country, we have made many changes in our facilities, in the number of staff that we hired, in the kind of cleaning agents that we've hired, hiring additional staff to clean touch points and high touch areas. We've installed all across campus little monitors where a person can stand in front of the monitor, it checks the temperature, and gives a student and a faculty or staff an opportunity to do a self-check. So we've done all of that, but then we we're reliant upon our scholars. And when I say our scholars, I mean our faculty and our students alike and our staff, that we have to make a commitment to keep one another safe. I have to say, I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper. I've said many times, I keep you, you keep me. I love you, you love me. We keep one another safe. And on our campus, as Dr. Varetis talked about, we're doing WWSS. Wear your mask. I mean, all of us got a mask and we were wearing it around campus. Wear your mask, wash your hands, social distance, and self-check. Because all that the institution has done and all that we are doing and continue to do, spacing out classes, making sure that the faculty members 10 feet away from the students and the students are 6 feet away from one another, to upgrading our virtual and our digital offerings so that students can take classes online. All of that can be defeated if we don't take, each of us, including the president of the college, all the way down to that interim freshman, if we don't take personal responsibility for one another.
Well, thank you so very much. I appreciate that. Judge Mann, you are an administrative law judge in North Carolina. You've been looking at some of the students who have challenges either because of special education, because perhaps they're homeless, students who have special challenges. What, in this environment, what can we do for those students who often get ignored when we do aggregate policy?
Well, thank you for the opportunity of letting me be on Rainbow Push. I have never been in such an august lineup of individuals, almost afraid to speak, and have been such a fan of Reverend Jackson for so many years, going back to the 60s. I can't really speak to higher education, although I was on the adjunct faculty at NC State University for 30 years and know what it's like to be in an in-person classroom. But as far as special education goes, it pretty much ends at the high school graduation. But it really has implications for higher education as well. Those students that arrive on campus, and our previous speaker just spoke to this, there's a great deal for these students to become equipped to compete at the higher level. Remediation comes to mind when you have special education students, and other accommodations that need to be made for them. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 still applies when you get to college, even though IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, does not. But there's a lot of transfer over to the Americans with the Disabilities Act. And these laws are federal laws, and they apply all the time. There are other less strict laws that apply to public education and education in colleges and universities, but special education in high schools, the Rehabilitation Act and the American with Disabilities Act, these laws don't change just because of the COVID-19. Students are entitled to them, and the students with disabilities are under special circumstances on this COVID-19. All students are under special circumstances, but these students are especially have difficulty when they reach the college level. I would like to note that with special education, it is often motivated by parents and school systems to identify students with disabilities. And if that school system is not working in that direction, or the parents are not working in that direction, they often go unserved. There was a lawsuit that was filed at the end of July, a national lawsuit, a class action lawsuit filed in New York courts, federal courts, by 17 different parents, saying that the school systems in this country have failed them, and that COVID-19 is not anything that excuses the following of these federal laws. And so where individual parents and school systems can't speak for the special needs children, this kind of class action suit can get to these points where there can be some overall enforcement of the law. So it makes it very difficult on school systems, difficult on the colleges and universities, but the federal law does not provide an excuse. It does not provide an exception. And these laws have to be obeyed and followed, even though they are with great difficulty.
Thank you so much, Brother Judge. We appreciate your input. And I'm going to go to Sonia Whitaker, Dr. Sonia Whitaker, who basically has been a stellar volunteer with us at Push Excel. She is a deputy superintendent of Dalton West, which is in the Chicago area, kind of. And Sonia, as you've listened to the college presidents and the others, what are we missing here? I'm especially concerned about homeless students who have nowhere to go, really. I'm concerned about students who are, I won't say victims, but subject to the digital divide. Everybody doesn't have the equipment. What's your take?
Thank you very much for posing that question to me tonight. I am equally concerned about the two topics that you just brought to the forefront, particularly because my interest is in the area of curriculum and instruction and making sure that we are providing, first of all, students with access to computer technology so that they can access the content. So I'll talk about the homeless piece in just a moment, but with regards to access to computer technology, we know that across our country, many different colleges and universities are engaging in a number of different models for providing instructional delivery to students. At the colleges and universities that have elected to go the remote learning route and and are blessed and fortunate enough to have been able to provide students with access to a computer and a broadband access, it is important to understand and recognize, unfortunately, that many of these students matriculated pre-K through 12 with minimal access to computer technology outside of their cell phones. And so I'll say, in the spirit of helpfulness, one of the things that I want to make sure that we don't miss is the fact that if those students are fortunate enough to actually have a home to go to, if those students are fortunate enough to actually have a dormitory to report to, they may be suffering in silence because of the fact that they now have access to a piece of technology that they have minimal exposure to. With that being said, we so often, I'll speak for myself, I have to check myself sometimes because I make fundamental assumptions. And I want to caution us, as I'm sure is on most, if not all of our minds, the fact that there are some students that will, again, speak to the positive, gain access to technology for the college and university presidents that have been able to pull that off for their students, but then have nowhere to plug up their computer. Or there are students who are homeless or couch surfing, but there's also those students who are still paying full tuition, who used to work, who don't have access to a job now, who have minimal access to rent, lights are off, they have the computer technology access, again, nowhere to plug. So we want to begin to think about that. One of the other pieces that I want to say directly to the college and university presidents, because I recently spoke with the heads of major textbook companies, and this may or may not be relevant, but certainly something, depending upon what curricular programming option that you follow, many of the textbook companies are saying that they actually never designed curriculum to be used in a remote setting. And so in order to do it right, for the lack of a better term, they're indicating, even at the university level, where you're buying into curriculum, for the lack of a better term, in some cases, that they would really have to revamp their departments for the purpose of having people write curriculum in various different areas of studies so that students can gain access for the purpose of increasing their intellect in an off-campus setting. And so those are some of the things that are on my mind. And I use the term readiness level. How ready are the students to gain access to the technology? How ready are the professors? As deputy superintendent of schools, listen, I have been on Zoom calls all summer. We provided training online training to my teachers in with the expectation that our students would go remote. And I must tell you, I like I'm looking at many of you now, I was amazed that some of them, even at the teacher level, that had trouble getting on the internet. Some had limited to no access. In my system, we've actually had to give Wi-Fi, computer broadband access to classroom teachers so that they didn't have to drive to the McDonald's parking lot and communicate with their families and important community members that support students. So I think that we should be aware of and make sure that even at the university level that we create support systems for the college professors who are also, I would say, suffering in silence, perhaps because they're embarrassed about not being able to use the computer technology to access the content that they need in order to deliver instruction effectively remotely.
Thank you very much. You know, I wish that we could figure out a way that everybody had internet access. I mean, it ought to be a right, not a privilege. There's so many things that you need internet access to do. You know, driver's license, registration, much of that can be done on the internet. And so again, we end up, see at Rainbow, we're always talking about equity, and we end up with a lack of equity because of a lack of access. That just reverberates. Linda, we have a class issue in Black America. Some of our young people easily come to college. They have everything they need. Their parents have been to college. They know what they need. But others, it's like you're throwing them in a strange sea. They don't know, you know, which way is up. I had a student once who I got her a great internship, and her mother said, no, it was slavery for her to work without being paid. Well, you know, we hope that our internships are paid, but if they're not, that's kind of what goes. What kind of inequities are you observing at Tennessee State?
Well, thank you. Well, the inequities are just so prevalent in that, one, many of the companies don't visit campuses anymore, and they look just for resumes, and they will do interviews based on the resumes they receive. You know, there's nothing you want that in person. Well, right now we're in a different world, but post Zoom and pre Zoom, the interview world, you want to talk to them face to face and be able to just talk to them. And so I know when I was at a different university, talked to a company, and they said, we want to, you know, I was dean of a business school at another university. They said, well, we want to talk to some of the students, but we want to make sure that they can it's a quick little test that we give them. It's more about the income statement, the balance sheet, and how they work together. And I said, so you give them a test, an interview? And they said, well, it's just part of the process. It's not a real test. So I said, so how have the other students done on it? And he said, well, actually, we're piloting it right now. I said, what does right now mean with this HBCU I'm with now? And they said, well, it's not that. I said, yes, it is that. That is in the law, I've learned that is discrimination on its face. That's per se discrimination.
Not even subtle.
So we're just not going to participate. They said, we're going to give them some scholarships. It doesn't matter what the scholarships you're talking about. We're not going to participate. So it was a big story in the paper. And so it's that kind. There are different code words that represent unfairness, that represent inequities. I just did an op-ed today in the paper. Many of you may have heard about the comments made by Senator Dodd, allegedly, and him and some others, that someone should not be on the presidential or vice presidential ticket because she was too ambitious. I just said that's what HBCUs train you to be. Students come here to college campuses, some of them despondent, indifferent, and we inject into them a source of pride. We want you to be ambitious. That's what we were. We got to 16, 19. We had the ambition to go somewhere and get out of this. So we got through with that one. I don't think he'll ever use the word ambition again in his vocabulary. So that's what we do.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because Reverend Wilson we've been talking about this. I mean, how dare somebody say a Black woman is too ambitious? I mean, what do you want us to be?
It's not about the candidate. It's about
It's about their attitude toward Black women.
Yes, that's code. That's a code word for you out of your place. You know,
precisely.
Ambitious, you know, so
It's another word for
Let's get Reverend Wilson in here. I have not ignored my executive director, although she probably thinks I have. Ambition, Jeanette. Should we all have it?
So I don't feel ignored, but I am really excited about this panel. And I thank you, Dr. Malveaux, and each one of you for joining us on this conversation, which we're going to have to continue more often. We are trying to build a network of college presidents, district superintendents, because education is really one of the civil rights fights that we must wage today. Our children are in underperforming schools throughout this nation, and you receive them in HBCUs and community colleges, and you have to then take them wherever they are to give them what they need. And I guess I'm just wondering, in this world of COVID, how do you deal with students who are, your freshmen are entering below grade level, and you've had that, usually you could bring them in the summer and get them closer to up to speed for the fall. How are you going to build these students up with, they've missed 6 months of the last year of high school, almost 6 months of the last year of high school, because they've been sheltered in place, allegedly taking classes remotely. Many of them did not attend the classes. What adjustments are you making in the curriculum to make sure that the students can perform at or above grade level? It's one of the questions that I have.
Reverend Wilson, this is Logan Hampton at Lane College. I'd like to jump in on that. Certainly, and I want to just say hi to you and thank you on behalf of my chairman, Chairman Henry Williamson, Bishop Williamson.
Yeah. Who ordered you to be here. Thank you so much for responding.
No, we pressed ahead with our Summer Bridge program. We have a Dragon Academy Summer Bridge program. Now, unfortunately, we had to take it all online. Mm-hmm. And so we delivered that program virtually. Now, what happened was we learned a lot. We learned a lot about this generation of students' commitment, about their ability to be present, about their skill level in terms of a virtual environment that really has helped to prepare us for where we are now this fall semester. There are some lessons learned that we brought forward. Those students they all have one of these devices, but they are end users. They don't use it, they use the device for pleasure. Right. Now we're saying you got to use this device as a learning tool. And I am very hopeful that what we've learned, we're going to be able to apply that in this fall and really help the students turn this thing into something that they'll be able to use for now and for the rest of their lives to actually conduct business, for commerce, and as a tool and not just for entertainment.
So given that, Dr. Malveaux and Dr. Glover and Dr. Whitaker, you all have raised this issue. Reverend Jackson talks to Silicon Valley on, we're looking at what should we be asking on your behalf. Dr. Verrett, you're a science major.
If I might, that the connection of our students with technology to wireless, and it will be a necessity going forward. So in other words, we've been going and looking for support from major Silicon Valley producers of technology to support our students. But also the support has to begin in K through 12. And because I think one of the difficulties that we think about is that we tend to think of higher ed as in a separate box. We're not in a separate box. And that a lot of the fact that not everyone gets educational justice, that not every child gets what she deserves in K through 12 is one of the economic inequities. It's at the root of the country. So what we need to do is basically that our students need, we need to also be engaging, helping us engage in bringing things into K through 12 before students come to us. That's a larger piece that we should be having that conversation. The better prepared a child is coming into one of our colleges, the richer she'll be.
So Dr. Malveaux and Pastor Brian is on the line from Silicon Valley, and Reverend Jackson. One of the things we need to have is the next town hall meeting we have. We want to have Silicon Valley looking at the educational inequities in terms of the technology apparatus and the curriculum, but also for teachers and students, and then the telecom companies who provide this Wi-Fi and internet access. So hopefully we can reconvene with you guys and just have that kind of discussion. And so when you ask for what you want, Dr. Malveaux and I were in New York a few years ago when Apple was there. And the question is, what do you want? And it has to be more than we need access. At the University of Chicago, they built a whole accelerator, a technology accelerator on the campus for those students and for staff. They flew the staff to the various educational facilities in Silicon Valley and trained. Your staff can be trained free of charge in a curriculum that they are familiar with, Dr. Whitaker. So we need to look at bigger ask from Silicon Valley.
You know, everybody and their stepchild has a sign up saying Black Lives Matter. You know, I walk down 14th Street in DC, and you know, stores that really do not cater to us have these signs up that say Black Lives Matter. We need Silicon Valley and everybody. If you say Black Lives Matter, put your money where your mouth is. Don't just put a sign up that says Black Lives Matter and do nothing. And so I think that one of the things that can happen is that we can put together an ambitious ask. Not just, you know, we want scholarships, we want internships, but we want board seats. We also want an ambitious ask that talks about the different ways that our young people, many of whom are at the sidelines, you know, we're talking about schools who giving young people laptops. But what if you have like 3 kids in the house? Right. You got 1 laptop, and you can't. Everybody can't get on the internet at one time. How does that kind of thing work? So we really should make an ambitious ask, and we also need to be looking at legislation. And I think, is my time up?
Yes.
Well,
everybody gets to get 30 seconds to wrap it up.
Everybody, give me a closing statement. Let me start with you, Glenda.
Well, in lieu of a closing statement, I want to answer your question about what we need. The biggest things facing HBCUs is first thing is that there's not a solid advocacy base. There's no advocates for HBCUs. You go into the Capitol, the legislature, big Capitol, the U.S. Capitol. Nobody's there fighting for HBCUs. Like, we don't have that strong base of fighters to assist us. That's number one. And so, what do we need when they ask us that? You know, we need expansion, growth, the best students out with the partnerships. And the partnerships make it grow. From the partnerships, that you get Apple to come to your campus and set up a store, the Apple Store, and Apple Labs. You need to have the partnership and the show, and what people and they need the education about HBCUs. You give money to UNCF and Thurgood Marshall, you're not giving to TSU. You're not giving to Lane College. You're giving to an entity, and you hope the entity finds a way to get it to them. So it's okay to deal with us directly. And God forbid, if you're a state school, there's a misconception that the state just takes care of 25% of the money for TSU gets come from the state. 75% we have to get ourselves. So we're not state supported, we're state assisted. So there's an education that needs to be done by HBCUs, private versus public. What that really means is that they all need funding. We all need to, as we partner, we're not just with our hands out, we bring something to the table too. We bring our talent, bring our expertise, and we bring our students for you to nurture and grow, and they grow up and learn, and they go back out and they deposit, and they're making contributions. So it's a circle of partnership, and there's an education need about what HBCUs actually do for you.
Thank you so much. You know, folks, UNCF is a great organization, and so is Thurgood Marshall, but they give UNCF, I think, like 80% of their money goes to administration, and about 20% of the money goes to scholarships. That's not right. You know, so people do think they're doing something for Black folks when they give money to UNCF and Thurgood Marshall, but there are other options. Deal with the schools directly. Brother Judge, do you have a closing statement? Everybody keep these little things like little things before Jeanette kicks us off the air.
I'll be very brief. I got involved with special education issues outside of the courtroom because I was very interested in how students can overcome their disabilities and their special needs. And we can give them the tools to do that at a very young age. For instance, just learning to read and comprehend and process from an early age can increase the flow into higher education. Whatever, quote unquote, the normal student is going through, the one with disabilities is under an added burden. I got involved with this to interrupt the pipeline from school to prison. And one of the easiest treatments was improving the reading skills between pre-K and third grade. And if we can interrupt that pipeline, then these students have a new horizon and a new place to go, and they can get to college and they can get further along. So just let's see what we can do to bring every child along in this process and overcome the challenges, whether it's visual, hearing, MS, autism, or something as simple as a reading impairment.
I might follow up on what the judge just said. I think we need to actually make an argument to the nation that its own interest needs the education of these Black and brown kids. There was a time 20, 30 years ago when China and Japan and India were sending their best and brightest to the United States. Right now, they are repatriating their best and brightest because they want to build their own economies. The country does not become a great country. This country doesn't stay great if it doesn't educate its own children, the brilliant kids that are in the 4th and 5th grade right now. And many of those brilliant kids that will build the future are Black and brown. If we don't think those are our children as a nation, we will fail as a nation. The nation needs to hear that its own interest requires the education of the Black and brown kids in the 2nd and 3rd grades. Somehow that escapes many people.
Thank you, President Verrett. I want to go to President Hampton for a brief closing statement.
Thank you, because I wanted to jump in there. I want to piggy right back on that and say, we've got to stop talking about our institutions in deficit language and about our students in deficit language. When students arrive on our campus, we don't spend any time talking about that deficit. We talk about what they can be and what they are and what they will be in their lives. And the same is true with our institution. We are the experts that we have been looking for. We know how to educate this population of students. Make an investment in us. I mean, we've got these political campaigns going on right now. At least half the folks are going to waste their money. They're going to give money to a candidate that is going to lose. Make an investment in an HBCU and you will know where your money is going and it will benefit some child's life. We have done more with less, more years and more time since we were founded. We know what we're doing. We're an excellent, exceptional institution. Make the investment in us.
All right.
That's a great pitch. I'm going to steal that.
That's right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's a great pitch. Brother Tolliver, quick closing statement.
Thank you. I will be quick. I'm almost thinking that people ought to apologize to Black preachers by saying that we don't know how to close. But I just want to say that in the midst of this pandemic, as we talk about physical distancing, I really want us to really talk about the fact that we need to be physically distant but socially engaged versus using that terminology of social distancing. This is a time that we need to work with our students, with our faculty, and with our staff to be socially engaged really in many ways that they weren't before. So again, thank you, Dr. Malveaux, and thank you to all the panelists in Rainbow Push for this very important moment.
Thank you. Dr. Sanders, Mr. Sanders, do you have a brief closing statement?
Absolutely. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for us and a time that we need to take advantage of. I don't consider the pandemic necessarily to be an obstacle. I believe it's an opportunity for those students who are coming now, who are determined to finish, and we've got to make an investment in them, and there needs to be an investment in us. I'm not afraid to operate as an atypical community college and say I'm expecting $1 billion endowment for Malcolm X College, because we take students, raw talent, and we turn them into to citizens and people who do great work in society. And that's what it's all about. And, I'm determined to make sure that that message goes out everywhere, because that's what we've got to do, to look at our students as assets, opportunities, not as deficits, as President Hampton said, or people to be looked down on, but they can do some miraculous things if you open your mind to the possibilities.
Thank you so much. Dr. Whitaker?
I would just say that I have been over the last several weeks looking for what my mother refers to as the blessing in the storm. I want to encourage us as leaders to actually pause and just take a deep breath. We need to take it easy on ourselves. We need to stop and just center ourselves, because we're being called to lead in ways that we've never been called to lead before. I want to encourage us to continue to look for opportunities to grow ourselves during this time frame. And in the spirit of vulnerability and closing, in my system, we close the digital divide in 21 days. One of the poorest school districts in the nation. And as a leader, in my moment of quiet reflection, I said, Sonia, y'all could have did that a long time ago. And so I really am, again, in terms of the blessing in the storm, making sure that I don't look at this as just the crisis. I let the outside folks deal with the crisis and remind myself that my goal is to prepare my students to be able to compete locally, nationally, and internationally, and remain focused on using their access to computer technology to do what we know that they have the intellectual capability to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that inspirational statement. Gives us all a lot to think about. I'm going to just close by doing what Reverend Jackson will probably do and remind folks that this may be the most important election that we've faced. Now, people say that every 4 years, but this is really true. I call the man a chucklehead in chief. That's not nice, but what can I say? But the Constitution he stepped on, people's rights he stepped on, over nearly 200 Obama era regulations he's turned back. What is it? The Environmental Protection Agency? No. They've suspended environmental impact statements. How do you do that? They've removed protections for transgender people. They basically looted the Consumer Financial Protection Act. I mean, looted it. I could go on. But I won't. But the point is that as leaders, as Sonia says, one of the things that we must do, we must model voting behavior. We must make sure that our students, our faculty, our staff understand the issue of voting. We had in 2016, only 59% of Black people voted. Whereas in 2012, 66% of Black people voted. We had a drop off because people were not excited about Hillary. Well, you don't have to be excited. She's not coming to your house. I mean, all you have to be is determined to get rid of the I don't know, I can't use the right word. I've got educated people on here. I want y'all talking about me. But, the filth in the White House. And I don't even call it the White House anymore. I call it the house that enslaved people built, because that's what it is. It's a house that enslaved people built. But in any case, please vote, and don't vote top ballot, vote all the way down the ballot. It's not only to get rid of the chucklehead in chief, but we need the Senate too. And for those of you who are in higher education, do understand that when the Senate and the House pass laws, they affect us. They ignore HBCUs except for bless Alma Adams, who was a faculty member at Bennett.
God bless her.
Yeah, she started the HBCU caucus, and she works tirelessly on the HBCU caucus. She's an alum of North Carolina A&T State University and served on the Bennett faculty for nearly 40 years. But she and some others, and it's a bipartisan coalition, but they have HBCUs in mind, but many other people do not. And this word ambitious, and some people think we're too ambitious. HBCUs teach our young people to put their hands up. Why should we have our head down? Why should we? It's our time. It's simply our time. So Reverend Wilson, I'm gonna turn this over to you and to Reverend Joseph Bryant. He is our sports director at Rainbow Push. And you, of course, are the executive director of Push Excel, or Push for Excellence. So I want to thank everybody for their cooperation, for their knowledge. And I'm going to turn it over, like I said before, Jeanette kicks me off.
I'm not kicking, I can't kick my president off, but we do want to give time for our sports panel to come on and share what it means to reopen your universities and colleges and schools in the era of COVID. What do you do about sports, which for many institutions is a major fundraiser, football, basketball, and oftentimes baseball. So we're gonna, our sports director, our West Coast director, he's really been doing a lot with our technology program. He is really a powerful, hardworking organizer in the Silicon Valley region. It's somebody that each one of you need to know as we build this coalition and really start attacking Silicon Valley from an educational perspective. We have not hit them, and they're making billions of dollars off of our children walking around with phones and cameras, taking pictures, and not investing in us equal to our reciprocal relationship, our trade relationship with them. So that's what we want to talk about. Pastor Bryant.
Good evening, everybody. Hello, hello.
And you all free to stay on.
Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you. Dr. Malveaux, you have been amazing as always. Always good to see you. And looking forward to, after the COVID is over, for you to make your way back to the West Coast as you often do. Your presence here is always a blessing. And to everybody on the call, thank you all so much that have been a part of this education. I've been inspired. Y'all have had church, y'all have had class, y'all have had all kind of stuff, just blessing us in so many ways. The blessing in the crisis, I'm gonna preach that, and I will give y'all credit for it when I preach it. Because not only do I do business and strategic planning and organization in sports, I am still a pastor. So that's a preachable word. Gosh, I heard Brother Hampton, I love it. Using your device for education, not just entertainment. I'm going to preach that. I'm going to preach it in the corporate setting. I got you, man. I'll give you all the quotes. I'll let y'all know y'all getting, quoted here on the West Coast and wherever I am virtually. But you blessed me. You really did. And I love the idea of being physically distant but socially engaged. That just made me want to shout in like 5 different ways. But my assignment tonight, and I thank God for Reverend Jackson and really just his complete thoroughness in knowing the significance of all these various platforms. Reverend Jackson is always on top of things, and he has been now for nearly 6 decades, just showing us that our voice matters, our actions matter, our activity matters, and our investments matter. And so wearing my national sports director hat tonight, I am very grateful to be able to bring on some colleagues of mine that are going to talk a little bit about how this reopening experience connects with the sports world, how it connects with athletics and sports in the college realm. That is still a $9 billion industry. It cannot be denied or ignored that there is financial consideration behind the NCAA and all the things that they do. In some ways, we understand there are benefits to funding the school through athletics, but at the same time, there are a whole lot of sacrifices, and those far outweigh, especially in times like this, the sacrifices on the backs of our young men and women far exceed anything that a dollar amount could be placed upon. And so I'm grateful for those that are sharing on the panel. If you all can just unmute yourselves, I'm going to introduce you all quickly, and you all just say hello and wave, and then we'll get to our Q&A. Let me introduce, first of all, he was introduced on the earlier panel, but I want to make sure that we include Attorney Robert Patillo, who is the executive director of our Peachtree Project in Atlanta. Phenomenal attorney. Can you just wave and say hello, Attorney Patillo? All right, very good. Unmute so we make sure we got everybody up and running. Also want to thank for joining us tonight, former NFL player and Super Bowl champ, Kerry Davis. We thank you, Kerry. You there? All right. Hey, Kerry. We also have another former NFL player who's now a wealth management advisor extraordinaire, Mr. Isaac Jones. Isaac Jones, Isaac Jones in the house. And then we have this amazing young man who was a college standout, and after his college playing days transitioned. instead of looking at things from an athletic perspective on the field, he decided to start an organization to help with mental health and the emotional and mental stability of athletes, called Second Chance Athletes. Founder, Mr. Daryl Stinson. Daryl, you there? Can you wave and say hello?
Hey, I'm here. I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Pull your shirt up a little bit so we can see Second Chance Athletes. I just said show the
Hey,
shirt.
I ain't got it like I used to, man, but I got a little something, man. Got a little something.
And then finally, let me introduce our first speaker who was with us earlier this summer as we engaged with President Mark Emmert, who is the president of the NCAA, Dr. Michael Douglas. And Dr. Douglas has a very unique perspective in this space. Dr. Douglas did play football in college. He has been a health professional in the professional ranks, and he currently serves, I want to make sure I get this right, he is the assistant professor of Morehouse College and Morehouse School of Medicine, and he is a contributing speaker and leader, instructor extraordinaire for their public health program. So Dr. Douglas, from every side, this is all something that you live daily. Talk to us a little bit, Dr. Douglas, about what you are seeing in regards to student athletics, college athletics, both what we've heard, what you and I heard from the president of the NCAA, and really what you are seeing from a college perspective. You just kind of give us a little snippet of what you're seeing as a professional and a professor and a medical professional.
Well, so I've seen us transition to virtual learning. I've seen athletes be displaced without effective communication about what their futures are going to look like. And then I've also seen the cost being counted by numerous institutions and saying, okay, well, we can't effectively protect our students, so we are going to postpone fall sports, fall athletics. And I think that that's a reasonable and prudent thing to do. Given some of our resources, this is a huge blow to our athletic departments and our institutions as a whole, because these are opportunities for fundraising. So our fall homecomings are not just fun, but opportunities for fundraising during those events. And so, it's been a difficult road, and difficult decisions had to be made, and some of them made them earlier than others. Morehouse led the way in postponing, fall athletics due to COVID-19 and the measures that need to be in place from a public health perspective. Being able to maintain a social distancing in the dormitories, being able to clean those frequently used areas, and to have the PPE, available to the faculty, staff, and students in those spaces.
One of the things, Dr. Douglas, I think ties into the previous panel in terms of how college campuses have to manage all the activity that needs to happen on campus. You kind of alluded to the cleanup and different things of that nature. With athletics, with sports, there are a lot of other considerations as well because of the close proximity of engagement. It's not just being on the campus, but we're talking about, football players being that close, basketball players being that close. Talk a little bit about what you're sensing and seeing both professionally and even on your own campus about how that affects the mood, and as well as, just thinking big picture, how the NCAA is kind of leaving it up to every conference to handle it on its own. What are you seeing are some balls we've either dropped or some things we aren't really thinking about, how this is really taking an effect in a lot of different ways?
Well, some of the positives, I'll start there with some of the positives, would be what we've seen with the NBA and the WNBA and the bubbles. Bubbles and very limited access, frequent cleanup, and frequent testing
Mm-hmm.
which is, not cost effective for a lot of our institutions.
Right. Yeah.
But is the, best practice, in those situations. And so we've seen some success. Now on the converse of that, we see what has happened in Major League Baseball, where we've had different teams have an increase in the number of positive COVID-19 cases as the weeks go by. And so just earlier today, we had a cancellation of an MLB game. And with the impending NFL season, I feel like we're going to see a lot more of those types of things happening. So don't have a really good outlook on what college football and professional football are going to look like, because there is almost no way to control what needs to be controlled in that particular environment. And that is a huge concern, given most of the players look like us and fall into high-risk categories.
Right. Exactly.
For not for themselves and their families.
Attorney Patillo, I know that there's some legal things that are happening. The schools are asking these student athletes to sign waivers, and parents are understandably extremely concerned. What are they signing away? What are they signing off on? What are they saying that they're not going to be liable for? Given what Dr. Douglas just said, the bubble scenario has worked. Just looking at the professional realms, the bubble has worked, but you can't be in a bubble on a college campus. So it's going to be more so like what we're seeing in MLB, where cases are going to come up. But what are the waivers, and what kind of expectations come along with those waivers, and what are actually the parents, especially those that are watching, that may have students, considering going back to school? What kind of expectations come along with those student athlete waivers, Attorney Patillo? Can we hear Attorney Patillo?
His lips are moving.
His stuff is too fancy. He's got Rome in the background or something. That's
All right, let's switch microphones. Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Gotta have the backup to the backup. But on the college level, the idea of having a bubble is completely impracticable. If you look at what the NBA is spending, that's they say $1 billion bubble to run for 6 months, and that is for a limited number of people. You got 22 teams. Many of those will not be there after the 8 games of the preseason, basically the finishing out of the season, and then each round of the playoffs they're going to be whittling down and down and down. And also you're dealing with grown adult men who have millions of dollars and therefore are able to financially and socially handle things at home and at the same time be secluded away. Many college athletes still have to work regular jobs. Many college athletes still have to take care of family responsibilities at home. So the idea of doing an NCAA bubble is just not going to work. Maybe you could do a tournament that way, but you won't be able to play an actual season that way, either for that goes for baseball, any of the other larger sports along those lines. And with this concept of waivers, let's understand a couple of the legal things you have to, that are swirling around with this right now in the HEALS Act, and that is the Senate legislation for the second stimulus bill. So this is what's was proposed last week by the U.S. Senate under Mitch McConnell, $1,200 in direct stimulus payments, along with an extension of the enhanced unemployment at a rate of $200 a week as opposed to $600, other details. But the thing pertinent to this discussion is they want to pass an immunity for colleges, universities, schools, businesses from December of 2019 all the way through the end of 2021. And what that would do is indemnify schools, colleges, high schools, charter schools, so on and so forth, after school programs, businesses, from being able to be sued if they do reopen and an outbreak happens. Many people think that the uncertainty associated with the virus will lead to liability regardless of what waivers are signed, and this is a real concern. And there's arguments on both sides with regards to the indemnity, because the indemnity would encourage people to be less responsible. If you're a business owner or if you're a institution, why do all this extra cleaning? Why invest in all this PPE? Why go through all these additional steps when I can't be sued? So the fears that will lead to irresponsible activities. On the other hand, it will be almost impossible for colleges, or for any school for that matter, to reopen without such, because even though you can have waivers, you can only have waivers to an extent. The person signing the waiver has to have informed consent where they're signing it. You can't sign away rights that you don't have. And then within that waiver, the damage has to be within the scope of that. You cannot you cannot sign a waiver to murder, for example, or you cannot sign a waiver waiving your right to claim assault or various other issues. And because this is so new and there has not been a Supreme Court case on it, we don't know how it will be adjudicated as to the enforceability of any of these waivers. That could lead to severe liability on the part of institutions if it rules that the school acted negligently or acted recklessly in reopening, particularly if there's internal documentation or emails showing that it was for the purpose of financing the school's operation, basically sacrificing students for the financial well-being of the institution. So before we get to those points, I think we have to watch that Senate bill that's going through, whether or not that's included, and then also get some court rulings on the enforceability of any waivers that are signed.
Isaac, because of your expertise, you are asked by families a lot for direction. I mean, your families come to you and they need direction. They need to understand financial matters, business matters, just from your professional perspective, as well as someone who played college athletics, played in the NFL, and now you've been advising families who need a lot of direction in an area they're not familiar. What are your thoughts and your concerns? Go ahead and unmute yourself, Isaac. Your thoughts and your concerns about where families are as it pertains to needing to know what to do next. And I'm sure you're already getting some of those questions as to what do I do? And even as a secondary question, those young people that are trying to play so they can get to the next level, they're playing in the college, world for a year is their path to hopefully get to the big dance. So what are your thoughts and conversations in and around that in terms of just trying to help families understand where they are and what their options look like?
Thank you for having me here. And it's great to be on this panel with a lot of these great panelists here. But I will say that, first and foremost, it's very obvious that, these student athletes are part of a system that generates billions of dollars annually. And, when they sign that scholarship or they become an NCAA student athlete, they become a cog within that wheel. At every level, whether it be Division II, Division III, Division I, there are certain revenue implications with the revenue sports and the non-revenue sports. And there's a hierarchy that exists, whether you know it does or not. And for this case, let's talk about Division I athletics. And speaking with families now, we're looking at players who are in their second year of school, but still not eligible for the NFL draft. There's an opportunity now where the school may not want to, enforce certain amount or type of coverage, right, to allow you to preserve your draftable status, to preserve your economic value in the following year's draft. You're now having to take on, your own counsel to ensure that if there's a loss of value, right, due to you going out there in a condensed season, playing, contracting the virus, maybe not being able to bounce back, that loss of value could really hinder or affect your ability to now come back and be that economic resource for your family that you might be, especially given the fact, as already also stated, with a lot of African Americans being at greater risk than other populations. Secondarily, if you're a freshman and you're coming into school and you're even looking at the prospect of, let's say you're playing basketball. You know, we don't know what the NCAA has decided regarding winter sports just yet. Made concerning, you know, what's going to happen with those whose eligibility would have expired in, you know, the 2021 season, and those freshmen allowing the schools to carry more scholarships. G League becomes more of a realistic possibility when you see the success that they had, some of the resources, and now knowing that you may have a pipeline. If you look at MLB baseball, you have the opportunity to go straight to the majors now, right? Because they can't afford to have these minor league teams due to the numbers and resources available at the team level. And so when we're discussing this, you know, we're looking at the economics of obviously an institution or the level that you're at. We're looking at your status, whether it be recruiting, whether it be now, do you have, let's say, are you on that NFL or professional radar? And if so, how to preserve your eligibility? I've seen kids where some kids have wanted to enter the portal to be able to now transfer to a school to ensure that they get a long enough runway to sustain ability to now move forward and the goal of playing beyond the collegiate level. And so we're talking about, and I don't want to get too far off topic, but these cost containment strategies that schools are starting to employ either to preserve scholarships or to be able to maintain solvency within their athletic program. So as a family, you have to look and evaluate your individual options, institution where you're at, what the likelihood of being able to opt out truly means. And that's one variable that, as you know, because the revenue significance is so high, you can't tell me that an incoming freshman or that a kid who's on the cover of a program is not receiving pressure indirectly to play or perform. Now you have to step back and have that conversation internally.
Right. If I can just put a pin in there before I go to Carrie, because I think that scholarship question, Isaac, is really important. Eligibility questions come into play, because if there's no season, what happens to my eligibility? If I get COVID as a player, what happens to my eligibility? Do I lose a year? Do I make up a year? And then, you know, physically, you know, what's happening with me in terms of my training, my regimen? Am I going to be NFL ready, NBA ready? You know, there's so many other considerations. And I think that this is where the conversation tonight, one of the things that I want to be able to do is begin to have a few talking points that we can share with families that are in this situation. I know Reverend Wilson is always concerned about student athletes that are coming up the ranks, and then they get to high school and they need some direction. They need some guidance. The families need to know how to handle these kind of things. Carrie, I wanted to really hear from you in this regard, because you've had to wear literally the helmet in all of these various silos. You understand what it is to be the college athlete, you know, hoping to get to the NFL, and then you were able to play, and then you decided to contribute back to the college ranks. I've been with you at these kind of combine scouting events where kids are coming out and you're coaching up running backs and different things, and then you were a journalist and you were able to have a different relationship, and now you're giving back to the school that, you know, groomed you, and you have all these different perspectives. What are your thoughts just in how critical a time we're in? And I know your biggest heart, because I'm a part of your foundation's advisory board, your biggest heart is for the kids, man. What are we going to say to these kids who have these dreams without killing their dreams, but being realistic about what's happening?
Well, one thing that I always try to express to young men, young athletes in general, is that, you know, your body is your business. So you have to handle your business according that way. You have to go about your business that way, thinking that way, because every institution that you will attend, whether it be college, whether if you make it to the NFL, NBA, MLB, they look at it as a business. So as an athlete, you want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself first, making sure that you are, you know, healthy and able to participate. Because if you're not, if you go out there and get sick or are not able to you know, compete at the elite level, you will not have an opportunity to compete at an elite level. So with this COVID, with all of the things that are going on, I think it's extremely important that these young athletes understand that there's a group of Pac-12 athletes that are doing just that, who are threatening to boycott to sit out the season if they are not, you know, if those issues are not met, if they're not given an understanding about what healthcare would look like. Because, you know, and this is not just for this year, but these are long-term issues. People tend to just because you play college football, that you're going to go to the NFL, or because you play college basketball that you're going to go to the NBA. You face the same amount of injuries, the same amount of things and hurt and harm that can happen to your body at that level as you can, you know, at the professional level. So it's important. They are working to get long-term health benefits. They are working on understanding of how this season will look if someone does get infected, or how COVID does impact the entire season. So, you know, I think that's an extremely important thing that they're doing with those Pac-12 athletes, to understand where they are, who they are, the amount of money that is being generated by these colleges, by these universities on behalf of them. And they're also trying to push for equality in sports and other avenues, but also be able to use their likeness and their name, because as you said, there are millions of dollars. These colleges and these universities are going to do everything they can to try to get these young men, these young women back on the court, back on the field, in order to help their bottom line. But how are these young men and young women being impacted while doing that? And like I said, I always tell these young athletes to make sure you take care of yourselves. I'll give you a quick story. There's a young man that plays for the New Orleans Saints. He was an undrafted rookie. He went to the University of Illinois, and he had a bad knee injury, and they were trying to force him back, tell him, come back. You need to come back. And I said, if you're not ready, do not come back. He decided not to come back. That coaching staff got fired, and I told him they are going to get fired, and that's why they're trying to push you to come back, because it's about them. It's not about you. So he decided to wait. He sat out. He played the following year. He went to the combine, ran a 4.3, which is phenomenal. He's going on his 4th year in the NFL. He just opened up a Papa John's, and he did what was best for him and not for what was best for the university. And I think a lot of these young men and young women have to understand that at the end of the day, you know, you may want to play football, you may want to play basketball, you may love the game, but if you get sick or if you get hurt or you're unhealthy, it won't matter anyway. So my message to them is always make sure you take care of yourself, and your body is your business, and treat it as such, because they will.
You know, that's a great point, Kerry, and I appreciate that. I know even looking at this town hall tonight is an education town hall. It really is about the education that we try to provide to our network. And I think some of what's being shared, just as I'm listening to all these wonderful comments, Dr. Malveaux and Dr. Wilson, you know, these are things that we may want to put into a very simple manifesto for the families of our athletes, because that oftentimes as we have these dialogues, we want to be able to share it with, you know, with those that need it the most. And so, you know, at some point we may want to follow up, Reverend Wilson, just to be able to get some really significant points that we can share with the families about the waiver issue, and about health benefits, and about the financial backgrounds of some of the things that have been shared, loss of eligibility, and just, you know, one pager that gives 6 or 7 bullet points, as we've done with these other manifestos we've put out, which means, you know, we are able to then educate and empower these young people as well as their families with information that they need. I love the fact that, you know, Kerry talked about the body being the business, as far as the way athletes should not only take care of themselves, but that's often how they're treated. And I'm glad that today's world, Daryl, mental health is now becoming much more a conversation. It's no longer taboo and a stigma attached to it as it once was. And it's important, because if you think about the mental side of sports, it's such a critical part. And here we are now in the middle of a pandemic. And as was said on the earlier panel, we're dealing with 3 pandemics. You know, we're dealing with voter suppression, we're dealing with police brutality, in addition to COVID-19. How are you, Daryl, helping athletes, and what are your thoughts around mental health? Because really, Second Chance Athletes, you do a lot of work with athletes to help them transition and kind of look at their next step. But a lot of that comes back to mental health and being able to process and think through things. Where are you in terms of what you see and what you're prioritizing as an organization to provide those services to athletes?
Well, number one, it's connecting with people like that are on this call, because it really does take a village and an army. And we got to attack this thing from a systemic level. And me having worked in higher education, I understand that. Me having worked in the sports industry with our athletic department, I understand that as well. And me being an athlete and working directly with athletes, I understand that we just have to hit them on all levels. And so the 3 things I wanted to share today was that number one, we have to allow athletes to grieve. A lot of times there's this dialogue going on as man, you should have been prepared for your plan B. And we use this as a time to bring up all the statistics about how an athlete won't make it to the next level. And all of that stuff is true in the right time. But when an athlete just lost their first love, they missed the game, they missed the camaraderie of sports, it's not the time to tell them that they should have been more prepared. So we got to be very sensitive in the way that we have that conversation and give them space to grieve, because according to research, most athletes start out playing the game of sports at the age of 3 years old. And so this is really wrapped around their identity, and it's hard for non-athletes to understand that, and they think it's just something quickly to get over. But just as it's hard to get over a marriage relationship that dissolves or any type of close relationship, so it is with sports. And so we have to allow, number one, athletes space to grieve. The second thing we have to do is we have to get our athletes talking. Depression grows in isolation, but it multiplies in silence. And I'm saying this for those of you who don't know my story, as a suicide survivor. And I attempted suicide multiple times because from the outside perspective, I was doing well. I was a Division I athlete. I played for a very successful team, had good coaches, had good relationships, charismatic. And when people would ask me, how are you doing after I transitioned out of sports, I would respond, I'm fine. And that was enough for them. But we have to get beyond that surface level. And actually, I have a resource that's free. I can send it to you guys if you're interested. It's called Help My Former Athlete. It's on our website. It's just an article that really walks you through how to get an athlete talking, right? How to get them beyond that, oh, I'm good, I'm straight, I'm all right, and really open up a little bit so we can really get to see where they are. And so we have to get our athletes talking, because if we do not, then they'll suffer in silence. And then the third thing we need to do is we need to resource our athletes. That's what this conversation is about. That's what we're all doing. Specifically, there's two resources I would highly suggest. Number one, we need to assess the mental health, because there's a difference between being quantum, or genetically mentally ill, and just being circumstantially depressed or mentally ill. And the way we treat that is very different. So we have to diagnose it first. From a cheap level, it can be an assessment, a spreadsheet, a questionnaire. From a paid level, there's a biopsychosocial that's out there that we've leveraged through other partners with colleges before. There is a price attached to it, but I think that athletes should be assessed for their mental health just like they are for their physical health. And that's both pre and that's both now. And once we get a gauge of where they're at, we're able to treat them accordingly, refer them accordingly, and really build out a plan to really help them live mentally healthy. So I think we need an assessment, and we need to distribute that massively to be able to understand where our student athletes are. And then the other thing is we have to understand the transition process. There is tons of organizations that help military personnel reacclimate to real life. There are not as many organizations that help athletes reacclimate to regular life. And we need just as many, if not more, resources for our student athletes, especially when we add in the factor that many of them come from fatherlessness backgrounds, and they need that guidance in that direction as well. And so that is what we do here. We're hand-to-hand combat. We don't get too much in the systemic policy and things like that, although a lot needs to change. But we work with the athletes, we get them talking, we help walk them through that process, whether that's they're building out a career or trying to get visible, trying to get job interviews, which can involve some training aspect. They need some skill sets that they don't have yet. Or we will connect them to business opportunities and how they build out their entrepreneur career. So that's it. Allow athletes to grieve, get them talking, and resource them.
See, that's why I have you under this umbrella with Rainbow Push Sports, man. I insisted on you being a part of the big picture. And of course, you have 3 points because you're also a preacher, which I love.
I'm undercover, man. You ain't have to tell anybody.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let the preaching sports leaders stand up. And also Reverend Wilson, he's going to be our speaker this week for our students on Thursday for our virtual student Excel program on Thursday morning. But one of the things that Daryl said, and I think this is important, I know our time is going to be running out here in a minute. And I see we have one question in the chat too, and we can kind of address both of them at the same time. One question was about eligibility of maintaining scholarship. Do any of you want to, I know we talked about it a little bit, but there's some concerns from some parents. A couple of parents actually sent messages as to whether or not their student will be able to maintain their scholarship if there's no season and or they don't come back to play. And I'm not sure if the tournament Patillo is still with us, but do any of you have any direct legal? I want to make sure we do with the legal side first. But I know from a practical perspective, I've spoken with Division I advisors, and they have shared that most campuses are going to allow students to come to campus as students, even if they choose not to play or maintain their scholarship throughout this year under some type of specialized categorization, given the tragedy of the pandemic, without losing scholarship. Attorney Patillo, do you have any insight on that?
From what I understand, it's going to be a school by school and conference by conference determination. Many schools, particularly I'm a Clark Atlanta University alumni, so the entire AUC is not coming to campus this fall. Many schools are making these decisions. It's going to bring in several challenges legally to that also, because you're actually allotting additional resources to student athletes versus the average student. Which would open up the school to liability for unequal treatment. So what I would advise people is to seek legal counsel before any decision that you make. Talk to your legislative leaders to find out what can be done from a legislative perspective to change laws or to temporarily put in executive orders to protect yourselves. But what you don't want is a situation like Major League Baseball, where you ramp back up and then it looks like a couple weeks later you have to ramp back down, and then you have to deal with all the shrapnel that comes out of that, where you're not sure exactly where liability will fall. And also, despite what some people in the White House may be saying, we do not know the long-term ramifications of this virus on young bodies. So we've had people like Rudy Gobert and Von Miller say that it took them months to get their lung capacity back, and we don't know what this will do to somebody's draft stock. Let's say if you get if you get infected with the virus, and then you can no longer have the cardiovascular strength that you had previously. We don't know if this will have long-term health impacts, because we haven't had the virus long-term. So I would advise caution to any decisions being made.
Absolutely. Isaac, did you have anything that you wanted to add? I know that you've already been fielding these questions.
I think based upon, very similar to what, Carrie stated, is that, you have to understand that, for you to have a fighting chance, you have to be healthy. As they say in the NFL, it's better to have a no showing than have a bad showing, but also not having to yield to the pressure of stepping on the field until you feel comfortable with the repercussions of doing so. And I think that's where we need to establish is that safe space for athletes to really advocate for themselves and say, hey, listen, I'm loyal. I signed it. I'm here. I would participate, but I can't afford to affect myself, my family, or my ability to continue to play a sport that I love, which you recruited me to do so in this type of environment. And so with that case, I do agree with the legal advice. I would also look at the option and ability, if you're outside of 2 years of eligibility and eligible to be drafted, to look at, certain types of disability insurance that can provide, a safety net and allow you to pursue it. But also, I'd also be evaluating my opportunities from a worst case scenario perspective, meaning that if I go through this, I contract this virus, and I do have a draft stock, am I going to be ready in time for the combine? We don't know. And I can sit here and say that the college football playoff committee, they don't even know what they're going to do at the conference level. They don't know how they're going to proceed with even scheduling. So there's a fallout that's unpredictable at this point. And so on a case-by-case basis, you have to really look and say, hey, it may be more beneficial for me to opt out, work out in private, and continue on. But if I'm still within that 2-year period, then if I can still come to school, be a student, knowing that I have a year to still get 5 and 4 and play, then you may want to pursue that as well.
We've been very fortunate. Go ahead, Daryl. Yes.
Yeah, let me just add 2 things. Number one, and all this is great, but one of the things I've been talking to athletes about is number one, leveraging your network. And so there's always this pressure to try to get everything from your school, everything from your organization that you're playing for. And we miss out on our network as athletes. There's a lot of people that are fans of our student athletes who would do anything for them if they were asked. And so we have to learn how to make the ask. Hey, is there a job opportunity you can connect me with? Is there some funding you can provide me with? Do you know somebody that can help me? And I can't tell you the number of people we have got our athletes to receive help from people who were just fans, just wore the jersey number or just loved the team. And so there are resources beyond just what the university or the organization can provide. We just got to get our student athletes to own their brand and to open up and talk about it. And the last thing I was going to say too is I think this is a great time. This is not my expertise, but this is a great time to not just try to maintain our scholarship, but to really balance the proportion of wealth. That because, you know, Roger Goodell even came out, made a statement and said that there would be no NFL if it were not for minorities. And I wanted to say, well, then can we get the same amount of wealth? and it's the same thing in all these organizations. When we look at how disproportionate the wealth is, this is a great time, not just to get through the next season, but to have the discussion about how do we get more equal share of the wealth.
Yeah. Well, that was what I wanted to talk about. When you look at the legal issues involved with this COVID, I would say we need to have our athletes and their parents renegotiate the contract they have with the school. A pandemic is an act of God. It is not something that the athlete just woke up and said, I have a normal cold and I don't feel like playing. This is something that takes lives and has taken lives. And so I think that athletes need to not see themselves in silos as individuals, but really kind of leverage and renegotiate these contracts. These contracts were not written for the benefit of the students. The question is, who insures these kids? If they get sick, who's gonna pay the hospital bills? Who's gonna pay for that respirator that they will be put on, perhaps? Who's gonna pay for all of the intensive care use? You know, so the school can't just walk away from liability when I'm generating income for you.
That's right.
And so I think that we need to convene parents and athletes and negotiate on their behalf. We have to become their advocates.
That's right.
They have made these kids gladiators. And if you remember the Roman gladiators, they didn't win anything. They may have won the sport, but they lost lives at the end of the thing. It's like the bullfight. You know, you may die with the bull. So we have to begin to advocate on behalf of particularly football players, basketball players, because they are most likely to get COVID, yet you can get it from any of these sports, baseball, track and field. You have a little bit better opportunity of social distancing. And we just need to look at the liability issue, renegotiating these scholarships. They're making these kids sharecroppers.
And Reverend Wilson, before I turn back over,
sharecroppers. That's what they are. I'm sorry, I got to write that down.
If I can just make one last comment and thank my panelists for sharing tonight, and we will continue this dialogue. I think it's important because, and this is one thing I put in my notes in bold. We are a month away from the start of the school year, whatever that's going to look like. It's a month away, and so there's so much anxiety connected to that, so much unknown attached to that, and I think from the athletic perspective, as well as, you know, the educators really blessed us tonight with a lot of insight, and I'm glad we heard from some of the presidents on how they're approaching things and some of the decisions that have already been made. But Reverend Wilson is right. We're going to need to advocate for families and parents and students, have information to give them, and then represent them in whatever context we can. This is where, and I'm closing with this, the NCAA, in as much as we had a very nice conversation with the president's office, Dr. Douglas and I, and Reverend Jackson and a few others, this is where the NCAA fails the athletic process by not having a true leadership context whereby decisions can be made that are universally beneficial for all and regulated by all to all for the benefit of all. Each conference is doing different things. That means that all over the country, we have schools that are writing their own tickets, so to speak, or at least conferences that are writing their own rules and regulations, and they affect our students differently. And so we have to be that much more astute, that much more tenacious about making sure that children and young people that we love are getting the information they need, and they advocate. As Daryl said, they advocate for themselves. They get the information they need. They do have to go to, in as much as you can negotiate with the school for your scholarship, do so, because we've already seen a lot of success with that because of the conditions, as Reverend Wilson said. Then there are other support areas that you can receive, and we don't want our student athletes to go by the way, off to the side and be thrown out because they aren't able to perform and to do the things they need to do. And if they are going to stay in school, they would normally have tutors. They would normally have special educational schedules. If they're not going to play, they still need the educational resources. They still need to be able to keep up with everybody else, because a lot of those athletes did not come into school as a 3.5 GPA. I can handle all the academic rigors of the school. They came in as a 2.0, barely got in, couldn't hardly write my name on the SAT, but I can run with the football. And so there's so many things that happen in this context, and we need to take care of our own, protect our own, and the unknown factor is huge. So as we deal with the unknowns, let's be diligent, let us be available, let's be supportive of these schools, the wonderful leaders that we've had on the call tonight, others alongside with Reverend Wilson and Dr. Malvo that lead our educational initiatives around the country. We as a sports arm of Rainbow Push, we will make ourselves available. I will connect with all of our speakers to make sure we can begin to put together some bullet points to share with our families, make those things available online, and then have further dialogue and even regionally being available. We have represented, we've got the East Coast, Pennsylvania, we've got Atlanta, we've got the Midwest, we've got, all of our panelists are from different parts of the country that they can be a blessing to, a help to, and support to the athletes. And so thank you again, panelists, for being on. Thank you so much for your insight, and we will continue this dialogue. We thank Reverend Jackson for his leadership and vision, knowing the significance of student athletes, being a student athlete himself, went to school on a scholarship, so he understands this lane and this language very well, and we want to be ready to advocate for our students and student athletes. Thank you so much, Reverend Wilson, Dr. Malvo. Reverend Wilson, I'm going to turn it back over to your hands to close this out. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, Pastor Brian, and thank each one of you for joining us. We want to expand this discussion with our with higher ed as well as with our sports panel. One of the things we want to do is make sure that we include a diversity of sports, because we have a number of people, young people that are in tennis and track and field, they're in golf, and I coached tennis, and so we need to see some more women on the sports panel. But I coach boys, so I just want y'all to know. We coach all things. I was a better quarterback than some of the guys that I knew.
So we really have to include women's sports. It's really important. Young ladies are being treated as poorly as the young men are.
Or worse.
Or worse.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Agree.
And so we really got to, Dr. Malvo and Dr. Whitaker, we've got to bring this, Reverend Brian, to a convention in the fall. This is one of the most important conversations we can have, because we've allowed our kids to be used to raise money, and they end up broken. They don't make the professional sports teams, most of them, and they have nothing. As you said, they enter college with a 2.0 and graduate with a 1.9, but it looks like a 2, and we've not equipped them for a life beyond the playing field. And so I think it's important that we really look at how we negotiate, Robert, and we may have to call a national withdrawal of enthusiasm if they can't protect us and protect our children. But please join us every Saturday. We're on a worldwide network. We're live on Facebook. We're live on the Impact Network at 10 o'clock Central Time every Saturday morning. We're going to have a sports. We'd like to have each one of some of these in our broadcast, Reverend Brian, each week, as we bring Dr. Malveaux these college and K-12 educators. So as we shape the broadcast, we want to hear from different voices as we build this team. You all got to stay on our education team. We love you. We appreciate you. And we need you. Is that right, Dr. Whitaker?
Dr. Whitaker, all right now.
And I need each of you.
Yes.
Thank you for joining our summer enrichment program. We believe with this COVID, it's going to have to take us into towards the end of the year. We're going to have to be teaching virtual sports and virtual everything to help our parents and our young people make it through COVID. That mental health piece that you're talking about doesn't just end with athletes in college. It starts with children in elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dr. Whitaker has a young son that's athletic, and we need to have you all talk to them. It's very important. So this is just great. I'm so excited. I don't want to end. We had more than 450 people viewing us. We thank all of you for watching. We've got to figure out how to include more viewer interaction, but we wanted to get so much information out this time. We didn't do it again. So we need to look at our agenda and figure out how to make it. Thank you, Dr. Malveaux. You want to say anything as we get ready to go?
No, this has been so rich. And I appreciate all those who have contributed to the conversation. Brother Bryant, but I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. You have an all-male panel here. Where are the sisters?
You know what? When we first put together the panel, we thought we were going to do it prior to our meeting with the NCAA, and we did have a balanced panel. You already know how I roll. I had a balanced panel.
Always has
a couple of sisters on there, and then when Reverend set up a meeting with the NCAA, we had to put it on pause. These brothers will tell you, Isaac and Daryl will tell you, we put it on pause. We had sisters on pause, and then when I saw that this was coming up, I said, well, hey brothers, let's just jump on this one and talk about, since we're getting close to the beginning of the year. But you know, I got the sisters. Come on now. So
well, everyone has contributed.
Strong.
By the way,
we love you. We love you.
So we appreciate you. But you know me, I got to raise it.
You know, I knew you would.
and we do want to help shape the public policy for sports and education. So we need your input in writing as we prepare for 2020 November 2020. This is a big agenda, and we can put it on every state level and in the federal level. Thank you so much. We're gonna close. Pastor Brian, you want to close us in prayer? Oh no, we got 3 preachers on here. Who's the other preacher?
At least 3, if not more.
Let's let the suicide survivor.
That's what I was going to. The suicide pastor. Help us out now, because we're in COVID.
Let's pray. Father, we just thank you for this time. Man, we are living in a time that is unknown to many of us, unfamiliar to many of us, and we need now more than ever your divine wisdom. We know that although our world seems out of control, that you are in control, Father. So we pray, grant us wisdom, grant us favor, and may your hand cover and protect us all. May you keep us safe. We just speak your name that's above this COVID virus. Father, we know that what the enemy is intending for harm, you are truly using for the good of our school systems, of our families, Father. I've heard so many stories of families who are spending so much more time with their children. And Father, it's a blessing to hear how innovative the church is becoming. It's a blessing to hear that we're having the discussions that we've been needing to have for so many years have now become the forefront, all because of this pandemic. So you truly are redeeming the time, and we know you are in the midst working. We pray, Father, that we would just stay in tune with you and step with you as you lead us and guide us forward. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Bye, y'all.
Good night.
Thank you, girl.
Thank you.
520 viewers.
Wow.
Woo-woo.
That's
excellent. Excellent job, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you.
Good job, Dr. Malveaux.
Nice job, team.
Thank you
all. Watch out there. Watch out.